Hello, everybody. Welcome to Behind the Curtain, Steve and Dave's look at some of the makers and shakers of the music scene that were not performers, were not out there in the public eye, but were incredibly important to the process and to the product of the music world. This is going to be our third session talking about the Wrecking Crew,
right?
That group of LA session musicians, especially in the 1960s, who were involved in literally thousands of hit records, hit singles and albums, covering the gamut from Frank Sinatra to the Grassroots, to the Doors, Beach Boys, and so on. We've already talked about the guitarists. We've talked about the rhythm section, and now we're just going to kind of do a cleanup round, starting off, I think, with the keyboardists.
Yeah.
Pianists.
So, Dave, where do we start? Who do you want to start with? There are a number of people we could talk about. Where do we start?
Well, one person that did some session work, and I don't know a lot about what he did, but you're kind of a Billy Preston guy, so.
Yeah.
If you're able to say something about that, maybe we can start with him.
Well, I mean, I know, Billy Preston. Certainly during the 1960s and 1970s, Billy Preston was considered one of the great keyboardists and a performer with a lot of flair. Billy Preston did a lot of session work, of course, session work in LA, participated some with the Wrecking Crew. It's also the case that Billy Preston's had his star was rising quite quickly. And of course, I think it's quite well known when the Beatles were floundering near the end of their career that I guess George Martin contacted Preston to bring him in on the Get Back sessions. Did I have that right, David?
Get Back sessions that became the Let It Be album
exactly.
and movie, right?
Yeah, and so Preston added, I think Preston not only added his keyboard wizardry, but also a kind of change of pace personality that I think was deeply appreciated. I think we're going to learn more about this actually with the upcoming film, the Peter Jackson film, that takes a real deep dive into those sessions, and Billy Preston is clearly a part of it.
Yeah, which we're all looking forward to, I think.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The Preston then, as a solo performer, then really hit the heights in the early to mid 70s. Space Race, We'll Go Round in Circles, were top 10 hits, and he was a very dynamic performer. Billy Preston ran into a fair amount of trouble later in his life, and also had a lot of health issues. I think a lot of kidney problems, in fact, and passed away a few years ago. But Billy Preston was, I suppose, of the keyboardist from the Wrecking Crew, probably had the highest profile at one time.
At one time, I think probably when we talk about Leon Russell, we're going to talk about some competition there, but arguably, at least for a while, Billy Preston is not known for this, but he also provided the title and theme to, I think it was Stephen Still's first hit.
Oh, yes, he did.
Love the One You're With. Apparently, this was something that Billy Preston was fond of saying. If you're can't be with the one you love the one you're with. And Stephen Stills heard that at one point and said, "Wow, that's catchy. Do you mind if I use that for a song?" No, go ahead. So
there you go. And a generous fellow to boot, I guess. That Billy Preston's sexuality was, he was a closeted man, and he was, I think, deeply in turmoil over his sexuality. This is one of the aspects of his life that was, I think, really problematic. One last thing I think I want to say about Preston is that he kind of disappeared in a way in the at the end of the 20th century. But following the death of George Harrison, Preston was invited to the the concert for George held in Royal Albert Hall, and he was Billy Preston. I mean, he was just fantastic. But that concert for George, the recording in the film, just magnificent. And you can see that Preston is just, I mean, he's at his, he never looked happier than when he was on stage with all those musicians and singing those Beatles songs, those Harrison songs. And so, yeah, Billy Preston is obviously somebody worth remembering. Absolutely.
Okay, and somebody that I think is more clearly a member of the Wrecking Crew, more clearly someone that can be assigned to that realm is Leon Russell.
Yeah.
And I think when we're talking about Wrecking Crew stuff, Leon Russell is inescapable as a pianist. A lot of early work. Phil Spector, Wall of Sound.
Yeah.
And I can't quite get it together anymore. Cher tells a story about Leon Russell and
Yeah.
Phil Spector. Do you remember how that goes?
Well, my recollection of the story is that the session is ready to start and everybody's in place and Leon is late. And I'm not going to remember the punchline, but apparently Leon was hungover. So he makes his way late. He's never late, but Leon's late. Makes his way. You have to go through all the musicians to get to the piano. And then I know that there's some back and forth between Spector and Leon. I think Spector's in the control room, and I'm gonna have to hand the story over to you because I can't remember, but I know there's now.
Yeah. I'm afraid I can't really remember it either. But Spector kind of dresses him down a bit. And,
yeah, I think that's right.
And Leon stands up on his piano stool and says something to the effect of, "Yeah, well, you can kiss my ass," and sits back down. And I guess that was the extent of it. And the session went on, but everybody laughed. And that broke the tension, and
that was it. And I think part of the story was that Leon, as I recall, Cher said Leon didn't say boo to anybody, and so it was very unusual for Leon to even make a sound, let alone sort of have a little explosion. But there you have it. Leon was capable of kind of his outburst, and Leon had a kind of an aura about him. He was Leon's from Oklahoma. He spent his formative years in Oklahoma, in and around Tulsa, played in a number of bands like, everybody did in the day. He was in a band in Tulsa. Starlighters, with, among others, J.J. Cale was in that band. Right. He remained a pal with J.J. Cale throughout his life.
He started off at 14.
Yeah.
That's just incredible.
It's staggering, and it's really something. No, it's really something, yeah. He eventually makes his way out to LA, I think in the late 50s, where he gets into the session world, and I don't know precisely how he became part of the Wrecking Crew. Maybe you know. I'm not sure how he becomes part of that.
I know he did a lot of his early work in the surf music scene, Jan and Dean stuff, Beach Boys, and of course. Was involved in the Wall of Sound, and that's where I think a lot of the Wrecking Crew people actually did get their start, because Spector liked to use the same people, always the same people, and as much as possible, really an identical of musicians.
No, that's exactly right. Yes,
I guess he was fairly superstitious about everything from the staffing to the tape used to
Do you think? I've always, absolutely, yeah. And so he wanted the same people, no matter what was being played. He wanted the same people. He kind of wanted them in the same places if he could. I'm also wondering. I mean, this is just whatever, just winging it. But Phil Spector had had a host of psychological issues and a host of abandonment issues. You have to wonder if, on some level, there was a piece of that would emerge in these sessions, because he was, I mean, you're absolutely right. He wanted the same people every time. In an area where he could have handpicked anybody, you know, just for but he didn't want that. And he Phil knew what he wanted, and he wanted the same people. And Leon was part of that crew for sure.
Right, and you had a small recording studio, an echo chamber, just filled with people, and maybe that was his nest. Yeah, okay,
well,
we
right.
probably don't have to psychoanalyze Phil Spector. Enough people have done that.
Well, sure.
But yes, and so these were very intensive sessions.
Absolutely.
Which is kind of strange, because the normal thing was to have them work 3-hour sessions. That was the standard union thing as well. But maybe in those early days that had not become a standard yet.
Yeah.
He would work them for hours and hours at a stretch.
Yes.
That they told.
People would be physically tired. I mean, their hands would be tired. They're
reaching the limits. Yes,
reaching the limits. Yeah.
Same things with the vocalists and everything.
Yes.
And that apparently was also part of his strategy, an intended sound.
It was.
That you get people to the point where they're not going to be doing improvising. They just want to. They're slogging through it at that point,
right?
As part of the wall of sound. So you get the individuals out of there, and you've got a mass.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
But you're also welding together a unit of people who become so used to playing with each other that they can just kind of they know where they're going. They know what people are doing, and they know how to respond to that. And I think in a lot of ways, the Phil Spector Wall of Sound studio experience was kind of a launching point for a lot of the Wrecking Crew.
Oh, I think that's absolutely true. And I also think that the Wrecking Crew learned a lot from Spector, learned a lot about just the notion of being in a band. And I think in the notion how leaders lead within a band. And this is, what's interesting about Russell is that he came, he was in bands in Oklahoma and all that kind of thing. But he did his time in the Wrecking Crew, and of course played on everything. But he seemed to really absorb a lot from Spector in particular. I mean, Russell, famously, pairs up with Denny Cordell in the late 1960s and starts his own
Shelter Records.
Yeah, Shelter Records, his own record label. And that Shelter label for a while was a really interesting one. In fact, is it not the case that Shelter was the label that they signed Petty and the Heartbreakers? Do I have that story right?
Well, Denny Cordell, that could very well be, because I know Denny Cordell was an important part of.
I was definitely involved in that. Yeah.
Of that, so.
I may have part of that wrong, but I know that Cordell was involved with the Heartbreakers early on. But Russell, Russell became a kind of go-to figure. That if there was going to be some sort of big tour, you wanted Leon Russell a part of your band. Not only was he a multi-instrumentalist, very accomplished guy, but he also had, I think, a kind of way about him that people followed, and people also didn't cross. I mean, there is a certain kind of brooding, smoldering intensity to Leon Russell that made him a kind of fearsome figure. Even if I think most people who knew him said he was like the kindest, warmest, shyest, just most self-effacing guy in the world. Russell on stage he looked possessed. And you just didn't want to F around with him. And I think that was a really important thing. If you were on tour and you wanted to keep the thing going, you needed to make sure that that what happened on stage and was consistent from night to night. And if you had Leon Russell there, you knew there weren't going to be a lot of mistakes, because Russell would.
Well, And he was someone that all sorts of people went to when they were looking to put together a concert. Concert for Bangladesh.
Exactly.
Russell was there. You see his intensity on the keyboards, watching the Mad Dogs and Englishmen concert film, which
Absolutely.
he put together that tour, told Joe Cocker a week before that he was an American tour. So he helped put together the musicians for that. And I think at that point, that record also was one that Shelter Records put out, right?
I think that's right. I think that sounds right to me too. Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. So Leon Russell then again famously was a part of the Concert for Bangladesh. He was part of the crazed Mad Dogs and Englishmen tour with Cocker. Leon Russell had a number of hits on his own. Was a fairly prolific writer in the 1970s. Hits like This Masquerade, Tightrope.
More than 75 times. This Masquerade.
Yeah, I think most notably by George Benson, but yeah, by lots of people. Tightrope, which was a hit, a kind of modest hit for Three Dog Night. Lady Blue.
Song for You.
Song for You, which is fantastic.
Song for You was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame in 2018. And that was recorded by over 200 artists.
Yeah.
He has some, well, another song that was not covered by a lot of people, but he wrote Superstar, which was a moderate hit for the Carpenters. It's at least on their greatest album.
Okay, a couple things about that. That is, first of all, I think it's a great song. It's such a kind of an odd choice for the Carpenters, in kind of an odd choice, and the performance. Well, what could be more different than Leon Russell and the Carpenters? I mean, I don't know. I mean, it strikes me as, but yeah, I mean, Leon Russell was a prolific and very accomplished songwriter. I mean, I think if you look at Leon Russell in the mid 1970s, he's one of the biggest figures on the American music scene. Not necessarily a household name, but a person of great note and great influence.
He recorded 33 albums.
It's unbelievable. Yeah.
Over 430 songs. He had 6 gold records, 2 Grammys. He was, I think, nominated for 7.
I think that's right.
Yeah. So he was, of course, friends with a number of influential artists, George Harrison among them.
Yeah.
But he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and the Songwriters Hall of Fame in the same year, 2011. But maybe to get back to his work with the Wrecking Crew a little bit. One of the first things that he did beyond just playing was he was producer Snuff Garrett's assistant, especially for his work with Gary Lewis and the Playboys. Gary Lewis, of course, was Jerry Lewis's son.
Yeah, yes, he was. Yeah, that had let's stop right there for a second.
Okay.
It had to be, I mean, Jerry Lewis was, he was a cultural figure of note. His son went a different direction. I think on some level, I think his initial fame was sort of enhanced by the fact that he had the connection to his dad. But they just really are very different people. Have you ever seen an interview with Gary Lewis and talking a little bit about,
I haven't. I haven't seen any at length. My impression of him is that he's a nice guy.
And that's the point. And his dad was not a nice guy.
A nice guy.
I mean, a famous a-hole. And so, so the Gary Lewis and the Playboys were kind of a big deal in the mid 1960s, and they were very much like like you're saying here, very much a kind of product of the Wrecking Crew, like so many bands. But it's just like,
yes,
they're a very curious group.
Well, they tell the story of Snuff Garrett had them go ahead and record their stuff. And he said, we're just going to have some people do some overdubs and things like that. And they essentially re-record the entire instrumental part with the wrecking crew. But the band came in and watched and were just like Google-eyed at what was going on. They just, the level of skill that was being exhibited. And they were a little bit intimidated in terms of like, oh, geez, we're going to have to go out there and play this stuff.
Well, that's right.
And Gary Lewis said, we did the Tommy Tedesco, my guitarist, had to dumb that down playing it live because there's no way he couldn't get there.
No, so, they set the bar too high for the band. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And they did the
and Hal playing on the drums and stuff like that. But this sort of thing apparently happened all the time. That they were doing this work, came in and watched and tried to pick up stuff. Mickey Dolan from the Monkees got his tips from Earl Palmer and from before he was even getting his normal drum lessons. He'd never played drums before, but he was supposed to be the drummer in the group, and they were going to do live performances. So, yeah,
just that in and of itself is that's just unbelievable. That you were going to literally put that Mickey Dolenz behind a drum kit in a live setting and expect him to pull it off.
But apparently he did,
Yeah, I mean, to his credit, I mean, he worked hard at it. I mean, a workman-like drummer at best. But I mean, there you go. I mean,
well, I think part of the calculation must have been, well, look what happened with the Beatles. Nobody heard what they were playing. They had screaming fans, and they would pick up, bits of it and recognize, oh, that's the song that we love, and that's really all they needed.
I think that was the calculation. That was the calculation of the Monkees from the beginning. Is that, well, these guys.
Now we're talking about the Wrecking Crew and the Monkees.
Yeah.
Can we agree that the Monkees really got a raw deal? Because everybody was doing this. But because the Monkees were on television, because people saw them week for week playing these instruments and singing their songs, there was somehow the expectation that they should be doing that. Well, there was no way that music was coming from those.
Raw deal, no. Because, to the Monkees, the four guys in the Monkees obviously benefited greatly from that television show. And in fact, whatever they became as performers is due more to the show than to the records. I mean, the records were important, but the show was the most important. And even within the show, then they have all these in the opening, for example, they have all these kind of live shots and the lights and the chaos of the concerts and stuff. I mean, I don't know if they got a raw deal. I mean, you're right. Everybody was doing it, and the expectations maybe were different from the Monkees, but they benefited so dramatically from the exposure of television. I mean, they're still, I mean, Nesmith and Dolenz are still kind of basking in the glow of that show.
I'm not saying that they didn't have a wonderful little career while it lasted. I'm just saying that I think it's really, it shows the extent to which the public really was not aware of how records.
I would agree with you there. Oh, that's absolutely true.
Because you had the same thing going on. You had Gary Lewis and the Playboys. You had the Association. You had all these groups, the Mamas and the Papas.
The Byrds, for God's sake, right?
Well, the Byrds were at least really all musicians, and they were able to.
Yeah, well, but
they were not session. They were not session players. They were not. Certainly, at the beginning of their career, they were not record makers.
No, well, no, they weren't, and they were. And you're right about the Byrds. They were musicians, But what we know the Byrds from, the songs that we know the Byrds from, those singles, Turn, 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 Tambourine Man stuff.
Wait a second.
That's all.
Turn, they did on their own.
That's right.
The difference between Turn and Tambourine Man was that they recorded Tambourine Man in 3 hours. And for Turn, they needed 2 weeks.
Well, you know.
All right, that's the difference.
Okay, fair enough. All right, okay. But
at least they did their own music, their own instrument, their own playing on Turn.
Fair point. To your larger point here, this was just how the business was run. And the public didn't know anything about it, in part because the public wasn't allowed to know anything about it. I mean, one of the famous things about the Wrecking Crew, keyboardists, drummers, the whole, they weren't on albums. I mean, they weren't credited with their work. And that's why it makes it, I mean, some of this stuff is trying to figure out what they played on is almost archaeological, right?
Right.
I mean, it's ridiculous on some level.
Well, and they played on so much, they couldn't even tell you exactly,
that's right.
On some songs.
No, that's absolutely right. Oh, I think that's
Tommy Tedesco said someone would ask me, did you play on that? He said, I'm not sure. He said, well, they do credit you on well, then I must have played on it,
but he wouldn't have been able to pick that out on his own. Right. It's just, that's just, so it is, it's a different era. But you've got these keyboardists who are playing on everything. Leon Russell, I think Leon Russell, in terms of the Wrecking Crew, the core, I think Leon Russell is a key member, if not, he's in your starting lineup, right? When it comes to the Wrecking Crew.
Yeah.
Or you're thinking, where's Leon? I think we need him here.
Just talking a little bit more about Gary Lewis and the Playboys. Leon Russell co-wrote This Diamond Ring. No, I'm sorry. He played on This Diamond Ring.
Yes.
But he co-wrote Everybody Loves a Clown, which might have been their first hit.
I think so. It was, yeah.
So there's that, and there were even some attempts, like Bones Howe, which was one of the main Wrecking Crew engineers, said to the association, well, why don't we just go ahead and put the musicians on the album? We'll just give them credit. The association said, no, our fans want to believe, and they need to know that we're the ones who are playing.
I think
that was actually nixed by the group itself.
That is such a rationalization. I mean, yes, right. It was nixed by the group. But the idea that they somehow owed the fans to keep up the illusion is just like, I don't know.
And see, I think
I don't know.
Just for a second, I don't think those guys were really even behind that idea. I think any one of them would have said, it doesn't matter if you listen to the musicians. Nobody really believes that we're the ones making this music anyway. But there, the studio, the TV studio was very much, they had a product there, and they wanted to maintain an illusion, and the guys had to kind of go along.
Well, they did. I mean, they were clearly, the Monkees were clearly dancing to someone else's tune. We don't really think that they thought that, though. That they believed that their fans thought that they were playing the instruments.
No, I think that they think it's unrealistic to try to
right.
Pull it over,
Okay, yeah, I hear you. Yeah, I got you.
All right. Leon Russell, just a couple other things. Day After Day by Badfinger. He was the pianist on that. Played for the Byrds, played for Herb Alpert. We already mentioned Phil Spector.
Yeah.
So clearly a very influential person, and has the Hall of Fame.
No question.
The Grammys to prove it, gold records to prove it.
And let's just, if we could, one more thing about Leon Russell, who had kind of his career hit the skids in the last couple decades of his life. He famously reconnected with Elton John in 2010. They completed the album The Union together, I believe, in 2010, and it had a short but triumphant tour together. Elton John was always Leon Russell's, I think, biggest fan, and so I think Leon Russell sort of ended up back on top again, which
Yeah,
was prolonged.
it's kind of interesting to see some of these old age comebacks. But yeah, Leon Russell was one of them, and it's because these artists inspired certain people in their younger years who
No question.
wanted to help them come back. Elton John tells the story of his one of his first performances in LA at the store, right?
Yeah, right.
And seeing Leon Russell in the audience, and it just freaked him out. And
yeah, it would.
Leon Russell went backstage, and Elton John was almost afraid that he was going to get a dressing down about, you call that piano playing?
Right.
But
that's not what happened. Yeah, but Leon.
No.
I mean, this is Leon Russell. He was famously a very kind and generous guy, and was nothing but really complimentary, and was incredibly boosted. I mean, Elton John talks about what a big lift, gave him an enormous amount of confidence.
Right.
Yeah.
So maybe with that anecdote,
there we go. Where are we headed next, Dave? Who else should we talk about with these keyboardists?
well, I think Larry Knickel is
Okay.
absolutely need to speak.
Yeah.
Larry Knickel, of course, later in his career, actually became a member of the group Bread, who the group was incredibly successful in the early 70s.
It was.
Kind of following the lead of David Gates with their soft, adult contemporary oriented
I think that's
ballads.
That's carefully worded. Well, yeah, but that's
Well, I was a Bread fan, I'll admit.
I know, and lots of people were. I
was a big fan back in the day.
Absolutely, but
and I think Larry Knickel is largely to credit for the ongoing success after the first.
I think that's absolutely true.
Because he was not in the group from the beginning, but who did he replace? Do you have that?
Oh, I don't know. I don't have that.
Okay.
No, yeah, but
the original Keyboardists.
Bread was a famously dysfunctional group. The guys didn't really care for each other much, and they were constantly at war with each other, which is part of the reason why Bread didn't last very long. I mean, a group that had as much success as it did, they just kind of imploded. But yeah, Nishimura came into the group and lent his keyboard skills and also his guitar skills. One of the things that Nishimura played on once he joined the group was a song called "Guitar Man," which has some soaring solos, and that's Nishimura on lead guitar. It's just really, really quite amazing. But the career of Bread, it doesn't last very long. But as you're suggesting, they had a lot of chart success, a tremendous amount of chart success. It was hard to get around it. Sold a lot of.
So that's kind of where he went to from the Wrecking Crew. But
that's right.
While he was in the Wrecking Crew, he played for the Mamas and Papas. Clearly, that's a story that anyone who's familiar with the Wrecking Crew knows, that they were the session players for the Mamas and Papas, including on hits like California Dreaming. That's Joe Osborne, Hal Blaine, Glenn Campbell, Tommy Tedesco, and Larry Knickel. So he was involved with that. He was involved with the Monkees, with the Partridge Family, played on Elvis records, Doors, played on Pet Sounds, did a couple other things for the Beach Boys as well. Played in Grassroots, played for Nancy Sinatra and Harry Nilsson on his debut album.
Yeah.
all that stuff was going on, and he was. I think the most famous story is the one about his. He worked with Simon and Garfunkel.
Yes, he did.
Worked for both of them in their solo careers afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
Both very taken with him, and rightly so. Steve, you want to say a little bit about the Bridge Over Troubled Water session?
Well, I don't, I'd like to. I don't know that. I don't know that much about it. I know that. I know you're getting to the song about the piano part. I don't know this. I don't know the story. So why don't you take it?
All right. Well, Hal Blaine was playing the drums on that album, and Paul Simon kind of saw Bridge Over Troubled Water as a nice little ballad.
Yeah, that's right.
He wrote 2 verses for it. And, only after he had more or less forced the vocals on Art Garfunkel, and Art Garfunkel went with it, and just those vocals make that one of the ingredients that make that into a really soaring.
Oh, no question. Song. No, I know that's absolutely
right. But another thing that they did, and they brought Larry Knickel in, and he had kind of this gospel sensibility that brought to that piano part, which just was, I think anybody who listens to that agrees that the piano is another one of the essential elements that make the song what it is.
Well, I think that I mean, when you combine the piano with Garfunkel's soaring vocals, it does almost a kind of hymn-like quality to it. There is, it certainly goes above and beyond anything. And it's there. It's the quintessential Simon and Garfunkel number. It's the one that people will be remembered for a long time. But just to go back to the story for a second. So Hal Blaine is in the sessions, and it's Hal Blaine that in fact insists that you have Garfunkel give the vocals a try.
No, I'm sorry. Paul Simon did.
Paul Simon did. Yeah. Okay.
Paul Simon did, which is strange because afterwards he really resented the fact that that Garfunkel got such a large amount of credit for the song's success and popularity.
Right,
and
yeah. You think of it, yeah. Well, they hated each other really from when they were young. Yes, and so you think about Simon and
Tom and Jerry. Was that
from Tom and Jerry? Their discord goes back to the late 1950s. They were, in fact, I think, friends, but there was problem.
Went to school together.
They went to school together, but there was problem early in their career. I mean, really early in their career when they were still kids. And as the story goes, Garfunkel, he was being shortchanged by Simon, and they kind of stopped being friends at that point. I mean, it's just, everything you see in the 60s, Simon and Garfunkel paired together, sort of these palling around, they just really couldn't stand each other. They just really couldn't stand each other. And the fact that they made this a working collaboration on any level is really quite amazing. And right, when you think of Bridge Over Troubled Waters, you don't really think about who wrote the song. You think about who performed the song. And it's just like, yeah, it's a Garfunkel number. It is the Garfunkel number. Just to drive Simon nuts.
Yeah. So there's that.
Yeah.
I think that is arguably Knickel's single most signature bit of work.
Absolutely, no question. Yeah, I would agree.
So one more pianist I think we have to mention is Don Randi.
Yeah. Okay.
He also did all sorts of session work with the crew, including work with the Beach Boys and with Phil Spector. With the Beach Boys, he played on Pet Sounds, but especially did piano work on God Only Knows, Vibrations, Wouldn't It Be Nice? A lot of the songs that are considered absolute pinnacle of Beach Boy songwriting.
Right.
And worked with Buffalo Springfield on Broken Arrow, Neil Diamond, Cracklin' Rosie, It's My Party, Nestle Gore. Like I said, Phil Spector, worked with Crystals, worked on Baby.
So the early days.
Right, in the early days. And Be My Baby this is an apocryphal story. Young Brian Wilson, driving in his car with his girlfriend, hears Be My Baby on the radio and has to pull over because he's just so stunned by what he's hearing.
That song it's incredible. It holds up. That it is so propulsive. It's so great. It's such a perfect mix. I mean, if you think about, I could understand why you need to pull over. If you had never heard Be My Baby and you hear this, like, holy crap, what is that?
AM
radio. It's fantastic.
There have been five decades of music since Phil Spector. But before that, you weren't hearing stuff like that.
No, you weren't. No.
So it was a revelation. And
absolutely.
If you're making an argument for the genius of Phil Spector, I think Be My Baby is one of your prime pieces.
It has to be. It has to be there, right?
So anyway, Don Randi piano on that. On You've Lost That Loving Feeling, Unchained with the Righteous Brothers, also Phil Spector, of course.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Also played on Everybody Loves Somebody from Dean Martin.
Yeah.
Destruction, Barry McGuire. Played on Something Stupid with Nancy and this other guy.
This other guy.
And Boots. He was part of her touring entourage for years. They became quite close, actually.
Well, it's
personal level.
What's not to love about Nancy Sinatra?
She seems like a real solid.
Oh my God, absolutely.
Person, so
for sure.
Played on I Got You, Babe. So going back to satellite field of Phil Spector. Played on different drum with the Stone Ponies. Played on association albums. Played on albums with Tommy Rowe, Cass Elliot, James Brown. So the whole spectrum, right? Worked with producers like Quincy Jones, Herb Albert, Lee Hazelwood, Jack Nietzsche. Worked with Frank Zappa and Sarah Vaughan. So he probably, everybody that was anybody in the music scene knew Don Randi and probably worked at some point.
Absolutely. Yeah. So one of the great keyboardists and a key member of the Wrecking Crew. Now, Dave, are there other people that we want to talk about here to work into this conversation? Because we could,
I think
dozens of people we could, but
yes, clearly, and we might want to talk about who the core was before we're done here. But I think those were the essential pianists.
Okay.
But there were some other important instruments as well, like the sax. And I think if we're going to talk about the sax and about the Wrecking Crew, we have to talk about Plas Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
You want to say a couple words about him?
I don't. I'm going to have to follow your lead here.
All right. See, folks, I'm so used to Steve being just a walking encyclopedia.
Oh.
There's just almost nothing that he can't comment on just off the top of his head. But all right.
But
for once. I'm
just gonna nod like everybody else watching.
All right. Well, Plas Johnson came out of New Orleans. That's where he grew up with musician parents. He left New Orleans for Los Angeles in 1954 with his brother. And they were doing all sorts of work in their own, trying to do a little bit of jazz, but mostly like bebop was what they actually wanted to play. He said it's what they wanted to play, but it's not what anyone wanted to hear.
Yeah.
So
as true now as it was then, but unfortunately, man. But yeah.
So at some point he drifted into session work.
Right.
Worked with people like Peggy Lee, Bobby Darin, Nat King Cole, Ricky Nelson, Sam Cooke. You know, that whole group.
Yeah.
Like Frank Sinatra, also the little older generation. And later on, even with Marvin Gaye. So again, there was quite a spectrum there. He was
Absolutely.
a player for like 20 years, which was a little bit longer than the normal lifespan of a
Yeah,
session
I think that's true.
as an active session player, and it was about 2 sessions a day during that time. So he's probably best known for his work on the Pink Panther theme.
Oh,
But,
of course.
But
Yeah, it's fantastic.
That's Plas Johnson. Henry Mancini wrote that theme with Plas Johnson in mind, and Plas Johnson said he thinks they got it on the second take.
Unbelievable.
And then everybody in the studio started applauding, even the strings, and the strings don't applaud anything, you know. So they had something going.
Yeah,
with
it's
that.
cool. No, it's fantastic. Time.
But also, you know, Peter Gunn theme, Mancini used him a lot. And the fact that he wrote the Pink Panther theme with Plas Johnson in mind says something about the level of respect that he had for him.
No question.
He also played flute on Rockin' Robin.
Oh.
So that's also Plas Johnson.
Yeah, and a very important part of the song.
Yes, that makes that song really.
Yeah.
He ended up joining the Merv Griffin Show studio band in 1970. So
Steady gig.
yeah, a steady gig, you know,
Better hours.
gig. So
Yeah.
absolutely. So that's Plas Johnson.
Okay, cool.
And now, you know, we've talked a little bit. Clearly, if we talk about producers that worked with the Wrecking Crew, it's a who's who of the music business in the 60s. We're talking about like Lou Adler, who was principally working with the Mamas and Papas, basically discovered them as a group. They were originally slotted to, I think, was it Roger McGuinn who did California Dreaming, who originally recorded it? Or was it Barry McGuire? I get those mixed up. Anyway,
I am not sure.
One of those guys did the original recording, but of course, when Lou Adler heard the Mamas and Papas, who had originally been hired as a backup group, because John Phillips and Michelle had written the song.
Right. Yeah.
Well, they're fantastic. So he just decided that they should record it themselves and should be a group in their own right. So in a way, he kind of discovered them. So
yeah, I think that's right. Absolutely.
There's Lee Hazelwood.
Lee Hazelwood, most famous for his collaborations with Nancy Sinatra, actually. But yeah.
Yes. Snuff Garrett.
Yep.
Not a name that I had even heard of before starting to look into the Wrecking Crew.
Oh, but he's right. But
he's incredibly successful producer and
Yes.
the music industry's producer, because his attitude is, I'm here to create hits. I'm here to create things that people want to hear and people want to buy.
Yeah.
And if I'm not getting top 10 hits, I'm not doing my job.
Right.
And aesthetics, what does that mean? What is that? That's doesn't interest me a bit. All I care about is that we're doing something that will bring in the bucks, you know. And so
you could see
a music company's grain producer,
no question.
and was successful. He was. I think,
Yeah.
he had over 40 top 10 hits, which is an incredible.
It's a big number. Yes.
And he was working with people like Cher and as I said, the Gary.
Gary Lewis.
Gary Lewis and the Playboys and people like that. But all sorts of people worked with Snuff Garrett. Not everybody really appreciated him. He said himself, Cher never listened to Gypsies, Tramps, and Thieves. She never listened to anything that she recorded with me, but I wasn't making it for her.
That's a very interesting relationship. But yeah, that's right. Well, Cher's a very interesting woman. So
yes, yeah. Randy Newman, Barry White, H.P. Barnum, people like this. Yeah. So where am I going with this? Oh, well, one thing that is important, and I need to go back to Plas Johnson for just a second, because one of the things that the Wrecking Crew was doing was they were creating instrumental pieces that would go on to become big hits, but had no band, no face to put to them, no products. Yeah. So they would create bands to front the hits that the Wrecking Crew had created.
Absolutely, yeah, that's right.
Like the T-Bones. It was it's a little bit like a Milli Vanilli situation. It's just, they're artificial groups. They're groups that didn't actually exist, but were created in order to sell the product.
Right. Yeah. But unlike Milli Vanilli thing. Well, no, man. Yeah, I get that. Yeah, I get the. Yeah. Milli Vanilli had no talent, though. I mean, they couldn't even. Yeah.
Apparently, the T-Bones. There was an Alka-Seltzer commercial.
Yeah, that's right.
No matter what shape your stomach is in, was the you can use Alka-Seltzer. Anyway, that was the theme, and so they created an instrumental using this ad music, and it became a hit. And so they created the T-Bones as the group that did it. There's another group, the Marquettes, kind of did surf music, and Plas Johnson was essentially the sax player, and it was a heavy on sax. The Surfer Stomp, a big hit for the Marquettes, right? And they didn't play any bit of it, but he kind of resented the fact that he carried that song. He essentially created that song and got no credit.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah.
And people who had nothing to do with it were just, getting the credit and taking in the.
I mean, that's right. And I think that speaks to one of the larger, points about the Wrecking Crew is that for the most part, it's, a very good natured group of people, happy to be there. I mean, for the most part, well compensated and grateful for the experience. But I don't think, what you're describing there about being resentful, having someone really, become well-known, whatever, based upon your work. I think that must have and for every person on the wrecking crew, that must be part of what gnaws at a studio musician, on some level, is that, you know, I'm making this happen, and yet they're on American Bandstand. I'm making this happen, but yet they're, you know, at some concert. I think that it would be hard to not feel that at certain points along the way, even if you understood the role and all that.
You know, I think that's true. But Tommy Tedesco said, you know, it's just a job, and it's just what is expected. And
right,
you know, it's just like when you create the theme to Bonanza, essentially with your guitar playing, you don't expect to see your name anywhere in the credits when the Bonanza credits roll.
Well, that's true. Yeah, absolutely. No,
and when you're part of a larger group that's creating something, and you understand they need players for this, I think it's probably also not as important as when you're the center of the. It's an instrumental piece, and your instrument is carrying the whole thing, shaping the entire thing. But again, Bones Howe, the engineer, said he said, Plas, you know, we can credit you on this. I mean, it is essentially your work. And he said, I don't want to be associated with it. Then it became a hit. I mean, Plas Johnson was creating, it was doing solo work, was creating solo albums already at that point on his own. So maybe he just really didn't want being associated with this other stuff. But
like we've talked about before with other, I mean, Plas Johnson came from the world of jazz, came from the world of bebop. He understood what was paying the bills, and it wasn't bebop. I don't want to say his heart wasn't in it, but I mean, it was clear that, you know, he brought a certain kind of attitude toward this that, you know, didn't, like you said, you know, like he told, I don't want to be credited. I don't want to be associated with this. I don't think that necessarily reflected what a lot of the Wrecking Crew was about. I mean, one of the things that I wonder about as we've been looking at these people over the past few weeks, I mean, they all seem to be operating without ego. They all seem to be operating without, you know, this sort of the senseless, you know, selfless kind of discipline into the craft and a workmanlike, and it's a great job and all that kind of stuff. And it's hard. Theirs is a job, and I get it. That's Tedesco's attitude, you know, clock in, clock out. The work is what's important, but it's not just a job, right? That they're making stars, they're making, you know, music that is influencing the culture. The fact that
in most cases, it's co-creation. The arrangements are arrangements that they come up with on the fly.
Yes, on the fly, sitting there in the studio on their folding chair. Absolutely.
And so, you know, they're very, very much a part of what makes a song a success.
But the fact that absolutely. But the fact that they are largely invisible to history. I mean, far less invisible than they were 20 or 30 years ago. And I think part of what we're doing here, you know, helps in that regard. But they really aren't well known. And yet they had such an influence on the culture. I mean, the fact that everybody can hum the Bonanza theme, even people who haven't seen the show, that matters on some level. And the fact that the creator is sort of invisible, well, that had to have hurt. I mean, it just had to have hurt. I mean, there had to be a certain kind of, you know, something is a kind of sense of emptiness has to be there for those people who were such a part of so many things that are.
You know, and I buy it when Tommy Tedesco says that it wasn't important to me. I knew that was the job, and I just, I was going in there and I was getting my dues, but in the end, he did appear on the Gong Show with the record to a session musician, and sang about what it was like to be the unrecognized
Yeah.
So clearly it didn't just completely leave him cold.
No, that's right. No, that's absolutely right. I mean, I think, and how could it? I mean, who's to? I mean, they're not to be blamed for that. I mean, it's only human to have contributed in such a meaningful way, and then to be uncredited or largely forgotten is just like, that has to be hard. It has to be hard for their families and stuff too. People who knew them and know the nature of their contribution to realize that most people around the world don't know who the hell they are, but yet can hum a lot of their music. Everybody can do their bass lick or whatever. I mean, it's just, I don't know. There's something about
The
it.
kind of person who would tune to the guy waiting at the bus stop with me, listening to his radio, and say, "Oh, my dad played the guitar on that." I would just,
Yeah, well, that's right. You're listening to my dad.
yeah.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's just like, there has to be, that's really something.
Well, and is it Denny Tedesco? Was that the son?
Son is the filmmaker and all. Mm-hmm.
So clearly he was
Historian.
highly motivated to bring these contributions to life.
Well, he was, and I think that we all are in a debt to him in the Tedesco family for putting together the Wrecking Crew book and film and all that, and really just sort of reviving. And I think without that, I mean, I guess somebody would have filled the breach, I guess, but it's an enormous contribution to music lovers to have a better understanding of their contributions. Maybe we should.
Herb Alpert was one of the producers of that film.
Yeah, that's right. Well,
just another one of his contributions.
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, it's hard.
As long as we're talking about Herb Alpert, just a second.
Okay.
This kind of wraps the whole thing up for me.
All right.
Because we also have, of course, in addition to all these other people, you had people on trombones, you had people, other people on percussions, trumpets, and things like that.
Everything, yeah.
So you had people like Bill Pittman, whom we've talked about on guitar, but also people like Lou McCreary on trombone, Julius Vector, a percussionist that we haven't talked about yet.
Yeah, we haven't.
In the wall of sound because, of course, Phil Spector needed a lot.
Right.
But they also worked on things like The Lonely Bull, and other of Herb Alpert. Great story about The Lonely Bull is that Bill Pittman said, a friend of mine said, there's a guy I know, a friend of mine who's trying to put together an instrumental and needs some people to work with it. Would you be willing to do the job?
Right.
Pittman got a few of these people together, like Lou McCreary and Julius Vector, and they went in, and it was basically just under the table. Here's $15, and they played it, and The Lonely Bull became.
Oh yeah.
Herb Alpert's first big hit,
Big song, yeah.
First hit at all, and essentially made him a millionaire. Herb Alpert went to the union and said, I hired these guys, and he paid the fine, and he did that so that he could pay them all what they should have earned on the recording.
Right.
How often do you see that in any business, much less a music business?
No, that's right. No.
To me, that's just an absolute tribute to Herb Alpert. But again, here we see some of the unsung heroes. We don't usually talk about trombone players and things like that, but clearly they were also a necessary part of the Wrecking Crew. Hal Blaine tells a little joke. What's the definition of an optimist?
I don't know. What is the definition of an optimist?
It's a trombone player with a pager.
Yes, there you go. All right, so let's do this, Dave. So the Wrecking Crew, the who's who in the Wrecking Crew. So if we're going to put our band together and Wrecking Crew musicians, I mean, who's got to be there? And I'll let you start. So Who's got to be there for you?
All right. Well, Tommy Tedesco.
Okay.
It's unthinkable to have the
Yeah.
record without him. Hal Blaine on drums.
Okay.
And Carol Kay on bass.
That's where I would start too.
And let's say Don Randi on
Okay.
piano and Plas Johnson on sax.
That sounds like a killer lineup to me. I would only add, maybe I would, on rhythm guitar, I might bring in that Arkansan Glenn Campbell. See if he can maybe add a little something. And with that group, you could conquer the world. I mean, it's again, the level of talent is just staggering. And
Yeah, and you've got to talk about people like Bill Pittman. Bill Pittman was probably did a lot of guitar work, but talk about Ray Pullman on bass. He probably did 85% of bass work up until the point where he became the band director for Shindig.
Right, that's right.
In 1964.
Which was a big show. It was a big moment for him. Yeah, absolutely.
A big show. But he was doing a lot of bass work. He was everywhere. But you have Joe Osborne as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like we said, Leon Russell, Larry Knickel,
sure,
Ray Johnson on keyboards.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of, and maybe to sort of wrap this up, Dave, I think we both were largely unfamiliar with the Wrecking Crew going into all of this. I mean, largely unfamiliar. What for you, you're interested in music, been interested in music about music for a long time. What has been revealed, do you think, with this deep dive into the Wrecking Crew? What for you, how do you see this?
Well, in addition to just being introduced to a lot of incredibly talented people, it was kind of a revelation for me about record making in the 60s.
Yes.
How it was done.
Me too. Yeah.
And that's an era that's gone now. There's at least two generations of music makers and
Mm-hmm.
of music making that's gone on since then.
Right.
But yeah, that was a real eye opener.
Yeah, for me too. No, that's fascinating. The glimpse into the sort of the record making machine. To go to Southern California and to see, sort of get a feel for what it was like day in and day out for these musicians, these producers, and all engineers. It's just really quite fascinating and very eye opening for sure. And
I think everybody who was involved considers themselves lucky to
I think that's right.
in that place in that time. And we're talking about producers or arrangers or the session musicians themselves. Certainly the artists consider themselves lucky to have had
Absolutely.
that sort of backup.
Yes.
So yeah, there's that.
There we go. Absolutely. So I think that wraps up this edition of Behind the Curtain, and really, I think for us, a pretty deep dive into the Wrecking Crew. So Dave, you've got some final words here for the viewers about, subscribing and all sorts of things like that.
Yeah. If you enjoyed this session, if you enjoyed learning a little bit more about the Wrecking Crew, we do a lot of different stuff here on Dave and Steve's. If you're interested in subscribing, which I highly recommend, you can do that right here. If you want to watch the other Wrecking Crew videos and other behind the scenes stuff, you can do that right here. And check out the playlist. We're going to be including a lot of the music that the Wrecking Crew was working on. That's right here.
Absolutely. So thanks, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.